Good evening, everyone, and happy International Archives Day to everyone. And on this occasion, we thought that we will initiate a conversation on business archives and its role in the corporate setting. In these trying, adverse times that we all are experiencing across the globe, the legacy of our founders is what provides us the necessary strength to move forward with an informed mind. And therefore, history is not just a nostalgia, but has much more to offer to the future. Through our masterclasses, we intend to explore the role of history as a learning tool or a strategic tool to map or analyze the future developments and trends. I welcome you to our first masterclass, and we hope that there will be many more soon. I also thank Dr. Firoza Godrej, Mr. Anil Verma, and Ms. Harpreet Kaur for being the constant support and encouraging the archives all along the 15 years of our archival journey. And thank you all for joining us in this celebration. And now I would like to request Dr. Firoza Godrej to address the gathering.
Thank you very much, Vrinda. And may I add my own congratulations and welcome on the International Archives Day to all the archivists who are present here, all of us who like going into the nooks and crannies of history, and especially business history. And I really appreciate the title of this three-day masterclass, Using Heritage as a Corporate Strategic Asset, Principles and Cases. But it gives me even greater pleasure to welcome our speaker for this evening, Anders Sjöman. Anders was with us in 2017 in a different world when we were all actually sitting in Vikhroli in Godrej Bhavan for the International Council of Archives section on business history and business archives. And welcome back to this virtual world, Anders. We're really looking forward to your keynote address. For those of you who don't know, Anders Sjöman, if I may say one line about him, is a Vice President, Client Offerings and Corporate Communications, Center for Business History in Stockholm, Sweden. So wish Anders a very good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us, and all those who are joining us from India, a very good evening. We are not a very old archives, but we're getting there, and I think we're a strong archives with a strong, small knit community of workers. And Godrej Archives started as a thought in the mind of our late chairman, Mr. S.P. Godrej, in 1995 as we were approaching our centenary year. The centenary year began in 1997, and we've had a very interesting journey getting ourselves established, getting our thoughts around the subject of the company archives, and then how to expand these thoughts to a more national and international level. And it was in 2006, 2007 that we really started taking off with a public face. Many people don't know what we are archiving, but now they do know. And we have been really fortunate that we've been able to guide and help other businesses in India of how to start an archive. Of course, we all know in this well-educated group that there are personal archives and there are business archives. And we are focusing on business archives. But that doesn't mean we neglect personal archives, because every business doesn't start as a corporation. It starts as a sole propriety or a partnership, a family event, and then it grows and then it becomes a public institution. So we are on a high learning curve. There's always something to learn. There's always something to share as well. And we are very, very open in our sharing with not only corporates, but with students, university students, to explain to them the role of archives. And for many of them, they're interested in taking this up as a career today. So I think we have two sides to the coin. giving information and receiving information. It's not just nostalgia and the past, etc. We want to look forward. What do our archives give us as a base on which we can build our future? And when I say our future, I'm not limiting it just to the Godrej Archives. I think it's business in general in our country. And of course, now we have to be thinking on international lines, which we are doing. We had this very, very successful, as I was commenting to Anders, that we're looking forward to doing something like this maybe in the future. Maybe virtually involve more people. Having this International Council meeting in India in 2017 gave us a lot of confidence, and especially to the staff, Vrinda and her team, to take this to another level. And I'm really very happy to say that it's not just invoking or evoking nostalgia alone, but an excellent learning, training for our employees, engagement, brand building. It's just an inspiration of innovation and much, much more. And I think we're on that track, and we should continue on that track. Our annual public lectures are very well received, and we've also got mini lectures. We team up with other organizations, like-minded organizations who are interested in what we have documented. So I think we've got a good foundation with a good team, and I congratulate Vrinda and I congratulate the International Council for having so much faith and repose in Godrej. And especially at these very, very difficult 2 years, we are happy to say that we've been able to share a lot more. I think Vrinda has queries practically coming every week to her because people are really interested in knowing that what can we learn from the past to go ahead with a stronger future. So welcome everybody to this first evening. I think you're having 3 evenings and I'm really looking forward to participating in them. So may I now hand you over back to Vrinda. Thank you very, very much. And Anders, I really do appreciate your presence here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Firoza ma'am, for these wonderful, encouraging words. But before I introduce the speaker, I would like to request everyone who is attending this session to feel free to post, tweet about our event on your social media handles. And of course, do not forget to tag Godrej Archives definitely. So thank you all for coming. So now let me quickly introduce you to the speaker. So when I first met Anders at one of the conferences organized by a section of Business Archives of International Council of Archives, our conversations introduced me to this very interesting concept of history marketing. And hearing from him the stories of different brands and the way they engage with history in a very futuristic way was quite an eye-opener and a great learning for me. So we were really happy to have him as one of the speakers, as Mrs. Godrej was also mentioning, at the ICASBA conference that Godrej Archives organized in Mumbai in 2017. And when we at Godrej Archives were planning to do this masterclass, we again approached him for the same, and I was glad that he agreed without a tinge of hesitation. So thank you, Anders, for readily agreeing to do this for us. But now I should formally introduce you as well. Anders Sjöman is a graduate of the Stockholm School of Economics. He used to develop English language learning websites for EF education. He used to develop case studies for Harvard Business School. And he also used to be a PR consultant as well as head of communication for an early video streaming service called Waddler. But for the past 6 years, he has been head of communication at the Center for Business History in Stockholm, where he primarily works with helping companies in heritage management and history marketing. And this kind of a profile is really very encouraging to see that history is not just done by the history students, but it can actually collaborate with so many disciplines. So welcome, Anders. So now all yours, Anders.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Dr. Godrej. Thank you for your introduction, Vrunda, and team. Thank you for inviting me. I'm standing here, as Vrunda said, without an archive background, talking about archives, talking about all the things we can do with the archives on the International Archive Day, which is exciting in itself. I am going to be talking about using heritage as a corporate strategic asset, as the title of my talk says. And as Runda said in her introduction, we have developed this idea of history marketing and heritage marketing primarily from an economical point of view. I'll explain a little bit later, but we are a center that lives on offering archive and storytelling services to companies. And for them to want to use to save their history, they need to want to use their history. So we stand on those both legs. We are an outsourced archive function, but to grow that business, we also need them to use our customers need to use their archives. So we have to encourage them and share stories, and we need to help them in their fact-based storytelling. So that's what my talk is going to be about: how to convince, persuade, and sometimes coerce people into sharing, making sure they save their history and then start sharing it. I'll be sharing my slide, and I hope the team tells me if something is going awry. I want to start by giving two examples of two very differing perspectives on the value of history that we come across so often when we talk to companies. Here's one extreme. This is a tech consultancy firm in Sweden that 3 years ago used this as their tagline. And as historians and archivists, well, it makes you cringe. I talked to them. They had just merged a Swedish tech consultancy firm with 150 years of history with a Finnish tech consultancy firm, our neighboring country, with almost equally long history into one. And they wanted to set a starting point for the new company, that merged company. And we recognized the need then to, okay, we can't rest on our laurels. We can't look backwards. We have to look forward to a new exciting adventure. And for them, that meant almost disregarding what they've done before, which of course none of us at the Center for Business History subscribe to, and I'm guessing none of you listening do either. But we have to recognize that that is an instinct, and a quite understandable instinct when you come to allocating budgets in a company. They have a plan for the next year, 5 years, 10 years. They have new initiatives. That's where the money needs to go, primarily. But we are looking for reasons for why they should put their budget in their history, in their heritage. So if that's one extreme, the other extreme, in a good way for us then, is this. This is Stockholm's largest department store. And this has been their taglines ever since they started in 1902. First with the latest. And 2 years ago, they ran this campaign in the subways and on the buses, and in media and in print, where they take in old advertisements and introduce, because they have the same department store, the same physical facility as they did 100 years ago, and place new models in that same setting. So they showed their heritage. They were true to their heritage, and they also showed what was new, what has changed. And to us, that is the best way to convince a company that they don't have to be afraid of being too nostalgic, of being too back-ended. History has a place when you move forward. History propels you forward, we keep saying. History is your best proof point for whatever you are promising that you'll deliver today. So that mix, connecting the old to the new, is what we're looking for whenever we talk to companies, whenever we talk to organizations. And I think another good example of that is what KLM, the Dutch airline, had planned in 2020 when they turned 100. Unfortunately, they were just about to roll out their anniversary campaign when the pandemic hit, and all the planes were grounded, and so was the campaign. I saw a few examples of what they were doing, and this was one key picture that shows that in over 100 years they've been doing the same. They've been having pilots take us up in the air, but they also show in that same picture what is new. There used to be no female pilots. Now we have technology that's used in the cockpit. That has developed. So in one picture, in one image, you show both loyalty and fidelity to your past while still looking ahead. That's the balance we're trying to strike all the time when we talk to companies and when we do client work. We try to persuade those that don't agree with us that no, history doesn't point one way and the future points another. History and our future points in the same direction. History gives us the background to where we are and gives us the energy to move forward. And that's the general approach. And I think that's a fairly easy to understand approach. And when we talk to companies, they agree when it comes to this. Okay, of course. We still have the question of how to get them to allocate budgets, how to invest actual physical money into archive solutions, into heritage management. And I'll keep talking about that. I'm going to do a quick side, because I've been talking a lot about we at the center. Let me just explain what the Center for Business History in Stockholm is. This is one of our archive depots. We have one in Stockholm, the capital of Sweden, and one in Uppsala, just north of Stockholm. We're hoping to grow the physical localities. For now, we have 75,000 shelf meters of historical material in those two locations. And we've been doing this since 1974 when we were established. We were established with a very concise mission: preserve and present Swedish business history. And in the wonderful international context that I find myself in tonight, it's good to recognize that we are focused on Swedish companies. That's our business. We love to exchange ideas with other archive solutions, with other archive organizations, which is why we and I were so glad when Runda reached out and asked if we could talk about this. There is so much to learn from each other, and in the best of worlds, I wouldn't be monopolizing the airspace now for an hour or at least 40 minutes. I'd be talking to you about these things, but I hope to exchange ideas later. We have, over those soon 50 years, amassed, as I said, 75,000 shelf meters. Think of that as almost 2 marathons. We have approximately 7,000 corporate archives from different corporate entities in those 75,000 shelf meters. A lot of mergers happen over time. So of course, in one deposition, there might be several corporate archives originating. We are important to recognize that, hopefully it's been clear already, that we do this on a very commercial basis. We sell shelf space, we sell archive services, we sell editorial services to Swedish corporations. However, we are ultimately owned by a non-profit organization. And in Sweden, the way non-profit organizations work is that they are owned by their members. And in our case, the members are the companies that have deposited materials with us. So we are in fact owned by our customers. So we talk about customers equally often as we talk about member companies. So the commercial activities I mentioned already, we sell archival and editorial services. But given the nonprofit owner, we can do in the research center that we have in that nonprofit ownership, where a few people work, we can do research, we can initiate projects, we can help bring out the stories that no individual company might pay for, but that we can find funding for otherwise. And given that we have the large amount of historical material that we do, we can run stories that nobody else could do. And we have run stories on women entrepreneurs over 400 years. In the Swedish context, they were not emancipated fully until 1927. Sorry, 22, when they got the vote. But we can find them in the archives doing business under other names than CEOs. So we did a book called, as I said, Women Entrepreneurs Over 400 Years. We've done a lot of those interesting stories that nobody else could tell, that haven't been told yet, about Swedish business and in fact about Swedish society developing. So that's the balance we try to strike internally, the commercial activities with the non-profit. Having the swings help out the roller coasters. And final note, we are about 28 people doing this. Most of us are archivists. I'm not. I'm one of the editors and storytellers. There are a few newspaper people also. We love storytelling. We love telling a good story, but we also love telling that story based on actual facts, on source material, on stories that nobody can come and say that's not what happened. So that's us. The editorial work we do for customers take various forms. You see books and websites and podcasts, and you might see some global brands that you recognize here, for instance, Electrolux and the Ericsson, the telco company, and you see companies that are very Swedish based. We do some editorial work for ourselves. We publish a magazine 4 times a year called, in translation, Business History, which has its sister website, Biz Stories. We also, whatever we produce, we package for use in the classroom to make sure that there's material for those students and professors and teachers in secondary school who wants to dive deeper into the world of corporate and business history. And right now, just finishing off, we decided early on when the pandemic hit that this is a rarity. This is something that needs to be documented as it goes along. So although we are mostly used to amassing historical documents and looking at them, we said this time around we need to capture it as it happens. So we have an ongoing documentation projects with interviews, surveys, media transcripts, and working very closely with a selected number of our clients in making sure that they give us everything they have on how they rearranged their world based on the pandemic. And this is material that we're going to make open to the research world, and hopefully this can be a contribution from the Swedish business world to the international business world when we, in a couple of years' time, hopefully can look back at the pandemic and meet again, and then we can discuss what actually happened based on actual source material. That's us. Our mission is to preserve and present Swedish business history. We do that by providing archive and editorial services. But who wants to buy them? How can we get people to want to purchase archive and editorial services? How can we make corporations value their history? And not just value in that general sense that we all value our history and our heritage. We need them to put a financial value on their history because they need to allocate budgets in the end. That's the economical world that we all live in, the constraints that we recognize. There has to be funds to pay for this. So it has to be in an organization, from that perspective, it has to be in an organization's interest to want to invest in their heritage, in an archive or in an anniversary book or in a museum of some sort, in an exhibition. It's hard sometimes to get across, but we take comfort, at least, when we see the little sign established, est, in a year. If nothing else, that tells us that this company is proud that it has a few years behind it. There is some recognition that heritage and history matters. So, and as I travel the world, not recently, but when we all were able to do it, I look for these everywhere. Is there an est or a since in the tagline beneath a brand? So here's one from London from the toy store. Here's another one from London from a pizza chain. Here's one from a deli in Delhi. And when you start looking, you start seeing these everywhere. And I take a little comfort in that. Okay, they value. Here's another restaurant. Restaurants are very good at marketing themselves as being established with a lineage. Old Abbott Grill is a restaurant in Washington, D.C. It has not been in the same place since 1856. It has moved many times. It has not had the same ownership, but it has changed many times. So the question is, how real is this Old Abbott Grill compared to the first one? But still, It's a direct lineage. It's a direct heritage to that original first old Ebbet grill in 1856. Here's an example of an outdoor electronic advertising firm that claims they've been doing this since 1879. Clear Channel. Clear Channel was founded in Texas in the US in 1970s. This is from Stockholm last year. But they actually bought a Swedish printing house that has its origins in 1879. So they bring that heritage in there. I might have reservations on that behavior, but let's at least acknowledge that they like being old. They like having a heritage. And as you start looking at these, you find them everywhere. And by the way, we've actually, a few of us started a Facebook group for this, where we publish examples from the world that we see. So if you want to join our Est, Since, or Founded group, please do, and post more examples. So for those companies, it seems that they have at least recognized that heritage is of value, some value. It might be a useful asset, but is it a strategic asset? Is it an asset that that has such strategic value that I want to allocate funds to it? And of course, my answer is going to be yes, but I'm going to base that on the core of this presentation, which is how to recognize a corporate strategic asset and why heritage and history is one. And to help me with that, I use a framework developed by Jay Barney in 1991, where he talked about firm resources and how to obtain a sustained competitive advantage compared to your competitors. He said that a corporate asset is strategic, and assets could be anything. It could be the trademark, it could be the patent, it could be the know-how in the employees if you're a service company. Everything is an asset, but only a few assets are of strategic value. And he said those assets are recognized by these 4 criteria. Strategic asset is rare. It's unique to that organization. No other organization has it. It's what he called imperfectly imitable. In layman's terms, it can't be copied by a competitor. It's non-substitutable internally. It can't be replaced by another asset. If I lose this thing that we used to have, can I take something else that we have and use it instead? And of course, it is valuable. And it's fairly easy to realize the first 3. Heritage matches all 3 of them. The last one is a little bit trickier, but I'm going to go through all 4. Heritage, I think, is a strategic asset because it is rare. And one way to recognize that is to look at 2 competing brands with the same origin. Both German, both shoe manufacturers, both from the same village, both from the same family. 2 brothers, the brothers Dassler, who started Adidas, or rather they started a shoe company. But after a while, the 2 brothers separated. There was a discord between them. And one brother started Adidas and the other one started Puma. Based on their shared experiences, their shared origins, became 2 different companies who have run perhaps alongside each other to a large degree, but also very differently. So even with that same core, no company can share a history with another company. Your heritage is rare because it is yours. It is unique to your organization. The second is it's imperfectly imitable, can't be copied. 2 examples of that. One is a Swedish ice cream manufacturer's annual pamphlet of this year's new ice creams. This is from 1976. GB ice cream, GB glass. And GB is the household name in Sweden for anybody who wants to buy ice cream. There are a lot of other ice cream brands, but the big one is this one. Today it's owned by Unilever, who hasn't touched the brand. It lives on because they realized that heritage cannot be copied by somebody else. We would be fools to change the name. Nobody else can copy that, just like nobody else can copy Godrej soap number 3. A lot of people can make soaps, but nobody can make a soap that has penetrated into the homes to such a large degree. And thank you, Runda, for sharing the picture. So history is a strategic asset because it's rare. It can't be copied by anybody else. It also can't be replaced internally by another asset. And I'm going to show a horrific picture for that. What happens if your archive and history burns up? You ask Universal Music Group. They're a large part of their archive for music files, original recordings by some of the greatest artists in the Western world, in the American world, went up in flames in 2008. There's no way to replace that. There's no other asset that can take that place. So yes, it's not substitutable. Last, this is going to take a couple of examples to bring home the point of why this is so important or valuable as an asset. First one is that history for us, it's valuable because it builds brand. I'll show you these images. These are all 3 Swedish brands that have made it globally. And when you look at a brand, you have a reaction to it. I think you probably had reactions, large or small, but to these 3 brands. Good or bad, it might be that you like the brand, dislike the brand, but it's a feeling that you have that has built over time. It's a historically based feeling, a historically based reaction that has come from you interacting with the brand. It's your heritage with the brand. And by recognizing that, whenever you want to, as a brand owner at a company, if you want to build your brand or change your brand or infuse it with new values, you have to recognize that those values that are there, you can't disregard them, you have to work with them. So yes, it builds brand. The other thing that makes heritage valuable, I believe, is that it's authentic. In a world where everybody tries to make up things, authenticity wins out. Being authentic and being true and honest to your past and showing that to people. And this is a little anecdotal piece of evidence I put up here as a picture. I went to a small hotel in one of Sweden's smaller towns. And I stayed there a night. And I wrote my name in the guest book on the left side of the picture. And on the right side, they had a guest book from 1942 open to that same day. So I could see the people some 70 plus years before I went there. Who stayed here 75 plus years? Where did they come from? Where did they seem to be traveling from? And just the wind of history swept over me. Small little thing, but the authenticity of that book to the right, nobody could replicate that. History and heritage also provides knowledge. This is obvious to us historians and archivists. We know we are, as a commune, we are smarter if we know where we've been. As a group, we are better off if we are knowledgeable about our past. We are better prepared for what the future brings us if we know our past. So this almost goes without saying, but I still say it. And there are a lot of phrases for this, but I just use this one from a corporation's perspective. Malcolm Gladwell, the Canadian business writer, business thinker, and his quote, "The most efficient organizations remember which values brought them here." So they keep those values alive in whatever they do next. History also creates value. This gets to the question that I sometimes get: how much money should I put on in my archive, and how much money? What's the return on investment if I put this much money? What's the ROI on history? And there's no distinct answer to that, of course, but there are proxy values that you can work with. For instance, Weber Shandwick, the international PR firm, asked CEO of large listed companies across the world, I believe it was 1,000 companies, 1,000 CEOs, They asked them a lot of questions, but one of the questions was, how much of your market value do you think is because of your reputation? And remember, reputation builds over time. It's not something that appears. And 60% is what they said. 60% of my market value is based on what I've done before. Not on the product I have right now. Not on the competencies of the people working here right now. But on the legacy of those who worked here before. On the legacy of all we've done up until now. That's not a small number. And finally, history gives context. It gives you a sense of being. It gives you a sense of place. And that's obvious, of course, but in a commercial setting, in a corporation's setting, I like to use these three gentlemen to illustrate the idea. The man to the left was Sweden's prime minister for a big period of time before the Second World War, during the Second World War. We keep saying that he built modern Sweden. There was a lot of formative reforms that were put in place, and the modern Sweden that we know today took its shape there. So we say that Per Albin built the country. But almost at the same time, and during the same period, or shortly thereafter, came two other gentlemen who did something else. Ingvar Kamprad, we say, he furnished that country, because Ingvar Kamprad is the founder of IKEA. And Erling Persson, he came and dressed that country, the new home, because he's the founder of H&M, the clothing retail chain. And at IKEA, if you believe in what I just said, that gives you a sense of where you are, of your importance. As you work the counter, as you work the cashier, if you're running in the warehouse, if you have yet another customer who's not really happy with what you provided and you need to deal with that. In your day-to-day work, knowing what bigger picture you're working in gives you energy, gives you a sense of purpose. So those is what we keep coming back to and saying why heritage is a strategic asset. It's rare and unique. It can't be copied by somebody else. It can't be replaced by anything else we have, and it's valuable for all the things I just listed. So with all that in mind, of course, companies should invest and allocate budgets to their history. If you don't remember anything else from what I say, and all those things were just bullet points in a list, here's the shorthand version of it: a grumpy old man. We all know grumpy old men. Here's ours. And it's a grumpy old man that I've taken from an ad, an American ad from the 1950s. Back then, it was an ad for why B2B companies should advertise in McGraw-Hill's publications, the publishing house McGraw-Hill. But I believe he's telling us that if you don't tell me your history, I'm not going to buy anything from you. If you don't share your heritage or honor your heritage and share your heritage, or maybe even want to hide your heritage, I won't be doing business with you. You can all read what he says there, but again, if I don't know your reputation, why would I want to buy whatever it is you're selling me? So remember the grumpy old man who doesn't know who you are when you're trying to sell him something. He's the key to why history and heritage is important to a company. And when you break that barrier, you get to a place where companies believe that history and future point to the same place. And this is what we call history marketing, when companies actually invest in it and work with it. We have a definition of it developed internally, primarily for our own benefit, so we know what we're talking about. And we say that and when an organization actively, not just by coincidence and by haphazard chances, but it actively uses its own authentic, there's no make-believe in this, heritage or its historical context. Not just its heritage, but remember that historical context. And they do it for very strategic reasons, business purposes. They want to build the brand. They want to energize the co-workers. They have business reasons for doing this. And in saying this, I just want to pause for a second, because I know, of course, I know that in the academic world, there's a lot of discussion about uses of history, on various reasons why somebody would want to use history or distort history, and there's a lot of important academic research going into that field. And the type of history use that I'm talking about is a very operational way of looking at history. So we'll just acknowledge that and remember that. There are important uses of history for academics in research settings, in policy settings, knowing the larger history of things. But to be able to do those types of research work and those types of policy decisions, there has to be source material that is kept, also from companies. And again, remember, for us to convince the companies to save that source material, there has to be a business logic for them. History marketing. So those were the principles. Those were the ideas behind the principal ideas behind what we tell our companies, our clients, the theory of it. Now for the practice of it. Here are 5 examples that I brought. I don't think I'll have time to go through them all, and some of them are very Swedish based. Electrolux and Ericsson are global brands, and you might recognize them. Electrolux, the white goods manufacturer, Ericsson, the telco and network provider. ICA is a Swedish retailer for food, a Swedish domestic food chain. Elekta is an insurer for retirement insurance. But I'll actually start with Swedbank, and then we'll see what time allows us for which other one I can do. Swedbank is a Swedish bank, active in Sweden, in the Baltic states across the Baltic Sea, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. But its origins are all with the savings banks of Sweden. And as you can see on their logo, they've been doing this since 1820, they claim. Swedbank, the name didn't appear until 2006. So what roots are they claiming? They're claiming their roots all the way back to the first savings bank in Sweden that was formed in 1820. This is a very simplified overview of their timeline. But just to bring home the point that in 1820, the first savings bank came in Sweden. And over time, there were many, many more savings banks created across the country. There were also agricultural funds just for farmers created all over the country. But over time, they all merged. So today we have the big nationwide bank, Swedbank, which in 1991 also purchased an affiliate in the Baltic states. However, there are still some 58 independent savings banks left. There used to be almost 500. But today there is 58 local and regional savings banks in Sweden, plus the big nationwide Swedbank. But Swedbank itself, it can actually trace its roots all the way back to that first savings bank in 1820. And when they came to us in 2019, a year before that 200-year anniversary, and said that we're thinking of celebrating 200, what should we do? Well, we discussed with them, and we all agreed that you can't celebrate 200 years of Swedbank because you haven't been around that long as an entity. What you can say that you can celebrate is the idea, the savings bank idea. So they celebrated last year 200 years of the savings bank idea, the savings bank concept, which to them is very important, very sacred almost. And savings banks are in our world separated from commercial banks. Savings banks were formed once upon a time in Sweden when the country was a poor agriculturally based industry, economic. economy to help the poor, if I may say so, save whatever little they had over. So they were formed small banks run by trusted people in the local community that set up proper banks where you could deposit money, earn interest, and withdraw money. Commonplace today, revolutionary then. So this revolutionary idea for the everyday man who didn't have a big business, because he would go, if you had a big business, or if you were a big business, you would go to the commercial banks. The regular guy could now go to the savings bank. And that's been core to what is today Swedbank, looking after that little small, the regular guy, the everyday man, the households, the smaller businesses. And a trick we use when telling a story is to say that this story is not about you. The story about something else. So the story about company X is really the story about, and then something larger, because that makes the story more interesting. This is a way for us to get away from navel gazing, from telling a story which is all about we were founded then, and our founder's name was this, and then this first CEO was this, and we purchased this company then, and we launched these products then. All this is important base facts, don't get me wrong, about a company. But the interesting story is, what did these people do? What did they offer society? What contribution did this company and these people do to make society better? And in this case of Swedbank, and here I use the word really to encompass all 200 years of savings banks. So the story of the savings banks and Swedbank is really the story about enabling a healthy and sustainable economy for the many people and their companies. This is not a catchy phrase. I agree. It's not supposed to be a tagline. It's supposed to be a help for us when we look at which part of their history should we focus on. And the fact that they even wanted to use their budgets for this history came out of the fact that they wanted to bring the company together. They are spread out over Sweden. They are spread out over other countries. They wanted to have a unified history to lean on, especially since they have merged with so many different entities over time. They wanted to have a common story to build their culture around. What better story than their history then to use? That's why they allocated budgets. And we said this is the story about enabling a better economy. We said, which stories should we focus on primarily then? If this is the general headline or setting, well, we should focus on education, community commitment from the banks, and which services have they provided for the many people. And this was a story told primarily for coworkers. If customers wanted to listen, or if they were interested, of course, and same for partners and networks, but it's a story primarily for coworkers in this example. And what we did was we then worked with them to add more to their archive, which was already pretty full, but we added more material to it. And then we did what we call a history sheet. We took their entire history, went through it based on those 3 themes, and we created a history sheet. Sorry that this is all in Swedish, but the idea is there. The gray on the top, you have different years, and we've marked what happened that year among the savings banks and what eventually became Swedbank, along the lines of those 3 themes. So just so we had everything listed, big and small. That way we have an easy overview over the facts, over what happened. And then we used that and said, well, those things based on, remember that portal sentence, that important sentence, well, that story doesn't really pertain to that. We'll put that aside, but this story has to do with it. And we built together, and this is where our storytelling comes in. Now we have the historical facts, we have all the information and the source material. Now we need to find a structure for telling it. And in this case, we decided, okay, let's pick over those 200 years, let's pick 7 years just to show progression. But let's make each year also represent a theme that's important to the company. So a year, something that happened that year, but really this is all about. And this is what we came up with. I won't bore you by going through exactly what they are. Just pick an example. In 1926, Lyckoslanten is a magazine that was issued then and given to school middle-class students with ideas on how and tips on how to save, even when you're a young one. They still publish that magazine. They are still very active in how to get everyone to make sure they save by just sharing tips and education. So those years, events, and then the larger story behind that event became texts. They were all put together in an overarching campaign idea, which was called Forward Then, Forward Now. They've always been looking forward. Over 200 years, at every point of time, they've been looking forward. But in practice, what ended up being is a magazine with those 7 themes as 7 main articles. And it was sent out to all co-workers in all branches in Swedish and English to the 4 countries where they're active. But now you have a lot of content to work with. So remember all that investment and budget they allocated to this. Now they can really reap the benefits out of what they've done because they have a magazine. That's the great first product. But they use that magazine in so many different ways. They reused all the text on their historical website. They did a separate anniversary site. All the research that we had done for them that went into producing that magazine, we reused that and did a podcast. 7 episodes with those 7 themes. But now we invited to each podcast, we invited somebody from Swedbank working with that particular thing that the historical theme was, working with it today. There's a film series coming out next week, and there were TV ads and ad campaigns based on the same idea, Forward Then, Forward Now. So we keep saying, make one story, but make it reusable. One history told in many different ways. So that was the first one. I think I'm running up against time. So I'll quickly just see if Brunda or somebody wants to write in the chat or let me know. Should I do one more?
Oh, yes, go ahead. Go ahead. One more shouldn't be a problem.
Good. Thank you. Then I'll do Electrolux. Hopefully it's recognizable. So Electrolux, the white goods manufacturer. And again, we did the same thing there. Electrolux turned 100 2 years ago. They are listed. They are have some large ownership, but scattered ownership of groups in Sweden. They were founded by a very entrepreneurial man 100 years ago, who started with vacuum cleaners, and now they moved into, since then, of course, into white goods for the kitchen, as well as cleaning products. But the history of Electrolux, we said again, that portal sentence of looking at what's the bigger picture here. The history of Electrolux is not the history of products or refrigerators or washing machines or air cleansers. It's about how Electrolux customers' lives have changed and become better thanks to their products. So flip the perspective when you're telling the story. How has Electrolux helped people create a sustainable home for their own family and the surrounding society? And told in themes, again, 3 themes. In this case, it happened to, not just happen, it was picked to mirror their 3 product lines. And we filled up the archive, had the source material, and started telling the story. The main product in this case was a book. The main driver for Electrolux, of course, was the centennial, but it was equally much a need to honor their heritage, but also to make sure it was a shared heritage with a lot of the companies that they have bought. They own American brands that has no Electrolux name on it. They own European other brands, German and Italian, that have the old German and Italian original brands. No sign of Electrolux there. But people in those countries still work for the Electrolux group. So they wanted to make sure that was a shared story. So we helped publish this book written by a seasoned, very experienced business journalist in Sweden, and we turned that into a publication, added images and pictures from the archives, and published the book, which Electrolux still, 2 years later, keeps sending out to new employees across the world to let them know this is the company that you're joining. At the during the centennial, it was given to all employees around the world. One copy of the book. But again, if you've made all that content, make sure you use it in other places. Most of the texts in that book were slightly shortened, but reused and put online on the Electrolux group website, where some of it was even turned into a magazine, or sorry, into a video. And here you can have much more of the images and the richness in photos from the archives and use that. But what I really like in how they used it is that during the centennial year, if you follow them on social media, for instance, LinkedIn, where this is a screenshot from, I saw that let's say that they did 3 postings on their corporate website every week. One was about something that the group did in general. One was a product launch. And the third one was a historical reaction to the previous 2. So if they had just launched a new vacuum cleaner, a robot vacuum cleaner, the historical reflection of that, remember our first robot vacuum cleaner, and a story about how that failed. So again, mixing and balancing the history and the heritage with what they're working with today. And then we also helped them do a physical exhibition. Nowhere near the grandeur and greatness of the Godrej Archives exhibition and museum, which I had the great pleasure of visiting. But in their case, this was a way to make a physical timeline. So the historical exhibition in their headquarters in Stockholm is on their way to their showroom for current products. So if you are an employee at Electrolux receiving a visitor, as you walk with them towards the showroom, you will be passing history. You'll walk through history and land in today. And if you feel like it, you can stop and point to things. If you don't have the time, you just move on. But history is there, enveloping you on your way to today. That was Electrolux, very briefly. And I think I'll actually stop myself there for time reasons. There are many other examples, and I'd be happy to share a link to a place where we have posted most of them. I just wanted to finish off with this, because indirectly during the time of this, the great title of a masterclass, I've actually given you 3, hopefully, maybe not masterclass worthy, but still 3 guidelines to the why, how, and what of history marketing. Because I believe I said why you should worry about your history. Your heritage is proof point for today's promises. People trust you when you promise something today because of what you did before. Remember the grumpy old man? He'll trust you if he knows your heritage. How do you work with this? Well, you actually start with today, what you're working with today, and you work backwards. This particular phrase, start with the future and work backwards, it's not ours. It's one we've stolen with pride from our friends at the History Factory. The History Factory is a Washington, D.C. based American heritage firm. They've actually even written a book on this, start with the future and work backwards. But it gives a setting. It's the idea of balancing your heritage with what you're doing today. And then the what. I've given you that in the portal sentence. So on a very practical level, when you work with history and making sure that companies get some usage out of it, keep these 3 pointers in mind. And again, to strike the right balance, complete this sentence. The history of our company is really the history of something else, something bigger. And with that, I'll just see if I had something more I wanted to share, but I believe I will just stop there. I will give one last poof what we call a History Marketing Summit, something we do every year. We didn't do it last year for pandemic reasons, but this year it's coming back. Every year we have a full day where companies share the stories that I just gave 2 examples of. We video film them. So there's actually on our website films from all these presentations. Some in Swedish, soon subtitled, a lot of them in English from companies like these. So if you want to dive even deeper into it, there's actually the stories from the people who lived them themselves when they worked with their history and worked with their heritage. And with that, on the International Archives Day, I just remind us all, save, because anything you don't save will be lost, like tears in rain, as he says in Blade Runner. Thank you so much for this.